Hey, true crime fans! Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free-true-crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free-true-crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.
When Madalina Cojocari missed a significant amount of school in 2022, the school set up a meeting with her mother. And what was revealed was the shocking case of a child who had been missing for weeks without anyone noticing. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello, and welcome back to Crimelines. Welcome for the first time if this is your first episode. This case is one that I have been following from the start, but it really took a while for all the legal processes that were in effect to finish up. I don't cover cases pending trial at this point in my true crime podcasting career because there's really nothing I'm going to bring to a case that's worth potentially interfering with someone's right to an unbiased jury, so I just wait on those cases to conclude. Though there were arrests made in this case, that doesn't mean this case is by any means solved. It's actually completely unsolved, and you'll understand more when we get into it and we get into the charges that were laid. Let's get started with Madalina Cojocari, who was born on April 11th, 2011 in Moldova. Moldova is a small country between Romania and Ukraine, and it was formerly part of the USSR. Madalina's father does not appear to have ever been in the picture, but to explain that situation a little bit more, we need to take a step back and talk about her mother, Diana. Diana was young, and she was living in Moldova, which is one of the poorest countries in Europe. In order to explore some of her options in life, she hopped onto a dating/matchmaking website called Global Ladies. It's basically women from around the world who are looking to meet men, mostly from the United States. And a quick look at the site shows that the women are mostly Eastern European, though not exclusively. These dating sites aren't exactly about romance, but more of a transactional relationship. In exchange for a relationship of some type, the men provide either financial assistance or a path to a green card. Now, that's not to say that people don't fall in love or have happy marriages using this type of matchmaking service, but I think we'll see that Diana was looking for a path to the United States first and foremost. It was in 2008 that Diana met an American man named Christopher Palmer, who was in his mid-40s at the time, and he worked in the U.S. as a draftsman. Christopher had never been married, and he actually hadn't even had a serious relationship since college. Diana was a bit younger than him, according to her profile. She was 30, but this was in his acceptable range of about a 15 to 16-year age difference. It wasn't like she was in her earlier mid-20s. They exchanged emails for a bit over a year, with Diana being transparent that she was looking to immigrate to the United States. Christopher flew to Moldova around 2010 to meet Diana in person, and their time together seemed to go well. They did the usual things you do when someone comes to visit. They went out to dinner, they did some sightseeing, and they got to know each other. According to what Diana told Christopher, an angel had told her that she was going to marry a man from America. Christopher knew that Diana was religious. She was Russian Orthodox, and this told him that she was very spiritual. The visit went well enough that they planned a return visit, but at some point after Christopher left Moldova, the relationship fizzled out. Christopher sent a couple emails that weren't responded to, and then he moved on. But then, almost out of nowhere, Diana reached back out to him to tell him that she was still interested in a relationship if he was, but there was one complication. In that time that she was out of contact with him, she had another relationship with someone local to her, and she had gotten pregnant. She had a daughter named Madalina, but the relationship with Madalina's father was over, and he was gone out of the picture. Christopher decided that he was still interested in pursuing a relationship with Diana, and he went back to Moldova for another visit. And this time he brought a promise ring with him to indicate that he wanted to continue the romantic side of the relationship. Eventually, Christopher proposed, and then he hired lawyers to start the process of bringing both Diana and Madalina to the United States. A K-1 fiancé visa can take several months to process under the best circumstances, but in this case, there was also a child involved, a child that was not the biological child of the American citizen, so it ended up taking about 2 years from when they started in 2013, when Madalina was just 2 years old, until she and Diana arrived in the United States in December of 2015. And as any good reality TV watcher knows, the couple then had 90 days to get married before the K-1 expired. Diana and Christopher, though, only waited a few weeks to say I do, and this is when Christopher said he found out about the first lie Diana told him. When they first met back in 2008, Diana said she was 30. She was actually 9 years younger than that. She was 21. So rather than being 16 years apart in age, they were actually 25 years apart. When they got married, he was 52 and she was 27. Christopher had not been looking for someone that much younger than him, which may be why Diana lied about her age initially, if that is what happened. This is Christopher's side of the story, and Diana hasn't, as far as I can tell, given any information about this side of their relationship from her own point of view. The only thing I find weird about Christopher's story about Diana lying about her age is that he only found out about it when they applied for the marriage license. He didn't ever notice in the 2 years of immigration paperwork they had to do for her to come to the United States that she was actually 25 years younger than him. I mean, certainly knowing your fiancé's age would come up in the immigration process, but maybe it didn't. And I think that it's important to bring this up just because Christopher's lack of curiosity and his lack of paying attention to details will actually turn into a criminal defense at some point. So maybe it is possible he truly just did not look at any of the paperwork ahead of time. This one little thing was not going to cause Christopher to call the whole relationship off, so they married in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and then in 2017, they bought a nice 4-bedroom home in Cornelius, North Carolina, which is located about half an hour north of Charlotte. Diana was a full-time stay-at-home mom to Madalina, even after Madalina was in school, and she spent quite a big portion of her free time getting into a New Age religious movement that had been started by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. I was surprised to read about this since I didn't realize this movement was still ongoing. Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a doomsday nuclear end-of-the-world predictor, and her influence waned significantly the way it always does with doomsday prophets. She prophesied a day for the world to end in the early 1990s, and then it didn't happen. She faded from the limelight within about a decade of this after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the late 1990s, and then she died in 2009. So to read about someone being this deep into her teachings in 2020 and even later was a surprise to me. According to Christopher, Diana got so deep into this that she would stay up half the night chanting and praying. When people would ask her what she did for work, she would say she saved souls, which was largely referring to her online forum preaching and praying that she did. But we're going to go ahead and pause this side of things for a second and focus on Madalina for now. Christopher would eventually have a lot more to say about his wife and what was going on in the home at the time, but we will get to it later. Madalina in 2022 was 11 years old, and she was a good student and was known for being sweet and well-behaved. She really loved horses, and you know how 11-year-olds can be when they really like something, it becomes everything. She had horse plushies and figures all over her room, and her favorite game was an online adventure game called Star Stable, where she and her digital horse went on quests. In the fall of 2022, Madalina was in the 6th grade, so she started at the local middle school. And while she continued to be a good student, she started missing more and more days of school. When Madalina would miss class, sometimes Diana would call the school and tell them that she was sick, but other times she wouldn't call. And she never provided a doctor's note or any type of medical documentation to explain why Madalina was missing so much school. It was to the point that Madalina's 6th grade school counselor had reached out to Diana multiple times to talk about the importance of Madalina attending school regularly so that she didn't fall behind. But it seems like it was at the same time that Diana was starting to object to the school curriculum, which may be part of why she wasn't sending her. She did not approve of the reading material that her daughter was being given, and she felt things like the Percy Jackson series that Madalina was reading was just too violent for an 11-year-old. Just for reference for people who don't have 11-year-olds or haven't read Percy Jackson, Common Sense Media, which is a nonprofit that helps parents evaluate media for age appropriateness, says that Percy Jackson is fine for readers as young as 9. Now, every parent should decide for their own families what to read or not to read, but I wanted to bring this up to show that Diana was being a bit more conservative on this topic than most people would have been. It's not like the school was giving Madalina a book that was obviously not okay for an 11-year-old. For most 11-year-olds, Percy Jackson is just fine. Christopher and Diana talked about homeschooling Madalina, or rather, Diana would homeschool her as the stay-at-home parent, and also because she had, according to her, been a teacher in Moldova. But Diana never made any moves to actually homeschool Madalina, like sending in the required intent to homeschool notice, or buying curriculum, or signing her up for homeschool co-op classes. The only thing she did was not send her to school regularly. On the days Madalina did attend school, her mother usually dropped her off in the morning, and then she would ride the school bus home when school let out at 4:15. And that is what Madalina did on Monday, November 21st, 2022. This has been confirmed using the bus's CCTV camera, and the timestamp of when she got off the bus was 4:59 p.m. Some of the reporting said that the school then broke for the Thanksgiving holiday, which seemed a little odd to me that they would just go to school for one day that week. So I found the school's 2022-2023 calendar because, of course, I looked it up. And this was not the last day of school before the holiday. There was school on Tuesday, but Madalina did not go. And then when school was back in session after the holiday on November 28th, Madalina still didn't show up. After a few more consecutive days of missing class, the school did reach out to Diana by phone, and she didn't answer. They then tried to reach her by phone and through email, and even sent the emails to Christopher as well, but they got no response. So on December 12th, after Madalina had not been to school since November 21st, the resource officer from the school and the counselor went out to the house to try to speak to Diana face to face. No one answered their knocks, so they left a packet with information on truancy. On December 13th, the following day, Diana finally called the school, and she agreed to come in for a meeting the next day. The counselor told her to bring Madalina with her, and according to this counselor, she told Diana that multiple times. Madalina was expected to be at that meeting. When a child has missed 3 weeks of school, the school wants to have eyes on that kid. And if the school did get eyes on Madalina, we would not be here today talking about this poor child. Instead, Diana showed up alone. She told the counselor and the resource officer that she actually hadn't seen Madalina, her daughter, since November 22nd around noon. This timeline would change, but we're just on her initial statement. What the counselor was hearing was that from November 22nd until December 15th, Diana had no idea where her daughter was. We are not talking about a 16 or 17-year-old who may have run away for the 5th time and the parents threw their hands up in the air. I mean, that's not okay either, but you can see how that happens. This was an 11-year-old child who was missing, and her mother and her stepfather had not told anyone. So the school called the police to have a missing persons report filed, and then an officer went out to the school to take the information. Diana, now that she had a minute to think about it, changed her statement, and she said she had actually last seen Madalina on Wednesday, November 23rd, not the 22nd. Madalina went to bed around 10 p.m. that night while Diana and Christopher got into an argument. The next morning, which was Thanksgiving, Christopher left to go to his family's home in Michigan, which was a 13-hour drive. When Diana went to check on Madalina at about 11 in the morning when she hadn't gotten up, she found that Madalina, her backpack, and some of her clothing items were gone. Madalina did not have a cell phone, so Diana couldn't track or call that. So instead, she did nothing. She didn't even call Christopher and see if for some reason did Madalina go to Michigan with him. She just stayed home alone until Saturday night when Christopher drove back into town. According to her, she asked him if he knew where Madalina was, and he said no. And then he asked her if she knew where Madalina was, and neither of them supposedly knew. And now there are 2 people who continue to do nothing. Diana said she couldn't think of where Madalina would have gone. She didn't have any friends she would have stayed with as far as Diana knew, and their family was pretty much all in Moldova. They only had one relative on Diana's side that lived in the United States, and he was just some vaguely related cousin. Diana told the police that she had no idea what happened to Madalina, but said something about Christopher putting the family in danger. The officer then asked the obvious question: if her daughter had been missing for 3 weeks, her husband put them in danger somehow, and she couldn't think of where Madalina could safely be, why hadn't she called the police? Diana said her family in Moldova actually told her to call the police, but she decided not to because she was worried it would cause conflict between her and Christopher. Of course, the police also wanted to speak to Christopher, so they had Diana call him and have him come to the school so that he could answer questions as well. And when Christopher got to the school, he had Madalina's school-issued laptop with him because, according to him, he thought this was about Madalina's truancy issues and the missed schoolwork she had. So he thought to bring the laptop so they could sit down and go over whatever was wrong. He said he had no idea Madalina was missing until the police told him. Again, she had been missing for 3 weeks, and he just didn't notice.
علي الحماس مع منيو بيتزا هات ماي بوكس الجديد. 4 خيارات ماي بوكس تعدلها على كيفك وزيد عليها اختيارات ما لها حدود. اطلب ماي بوكس اليوم وخليها على ذوقك. بيتزا أو ملت كله بكيفك، وطلباتك الجانبية اختر 2 أو مشروب، خياراتك ما تنتهي. هي شروطك وأحكامك اللي ترضي ذوقك. منيو بيتزا هات ماي بوكس الجديد بشروطك وأحكامك. بيتزا هات اطلب اليوم.
Now, Christopher's story, his timeline, contradicts Diana's. I do have the body cam recording of his interview, but it is in an echoey room, and body cams don't exactly have studio quality microphones. The audio is frankly terrible. I did the best I could to understand it, but I admit I did not catch everything. But from what I could understand, the first thing Christopher said that didn't line up with what Diana said was the timeline for when he left for Michigan. He said he did not leave on Thanksgiving like Diana said. He had left the day before in the morning while Madalina was, he thought, still upstairs sleeping. The purpose of this trip was to pick up some clothing items that Diana had left up there. Christopher was from Michigan, and he explained that they had been planning to move up there to live near family, but then they changed their minds. So Diana asked him to go up and get the stuff they had already moved and stored at a family member's house, which he did. Christopher did agree with Diana that the two had an argument the night before he left, which she put at Wednesday night, but he put at Tuesday night. The source of the argument was that he heard something about investing in silver on a podcast, so he put a large amount of money into this investment. Diana didn't like it, and it caused an argument. He did not get into all of the details at this point on the body cam footage, but he later explained that the issue Diana had was that she was on the documents named as a beneficiary, and she did not want her name on this paperwork. There was also something in there that used the word custodian, and she misunderstood what it meant and thought it was referring to the company somehow having a custodianship over her as a person. She made Christopher cancel the deal, but because the price of silver had dipped since he bought it, he ended up losing quite a bit of money. Again, we're going to get more into this and Diana's mindset in November of 2022 later in more context. But right now, I want to stay focused on Madalina and what Diana and Christopher knew or didn't know or what they would admit to the police. Christopher said when he got back from his trip on Saturday night, Madalina wasn't there, so he asked Diana where she was, which is the opposite of how Diana said it happened. Diana said she was the one who broached the topic first. He said that Diana made a comment about not knowing where Madalina was and then turned it on him, asking, does he know where she is? And he said he didn't know. But his belief was that Diana did know where she was. And he thought she continued to know where Madalina was, even when he hadn't seen her himself. He said he would sometimes ask where she was, and Diana would just turn the question back on him. And he thought she was just at a school activity or maybe a friend's house in these moments. He said he had no reason to believe Madalina wasn't around because Diana took Madalina up to the mountains on little trips in this time frame, even leaving a note on the fridge at least once, indicating that that's where they were. He said one time he did confront Diana directly to ask if she had hidden Madalina somewhere, and Diana would not answer him directly. Out of context, this seems like a very odd question, and he definitely provided it to the police without any context. But the larger context that came out later was that Christopher suspected Diana was preparing to leave him at this point, and that's why he thought she may have sent Madalina away. Christopher admitted to the police that he didn't know where Madalina was this entire time, but he didn't realize that no one knew where she was. He said that her bedroom light would be on in the evenings, and Madalina would be in there a lot playing on her computer, so it didn't seem strange to him. He thought when she wasn't at home, she was just out and about. He got those messages from the school about her attendance, but Diana was the one who handled that stuff, so he mostly ignored the emails, only bringing them up to Diana sometimes. I can't really understand on this recording what he said about what Diana thought about the truancy issues. That's one of the parts of this recording that is just too muddy. Christopher described Madalina as a happy girl who loved books and horses and that she got along well with both him and Diana. While Diana was the primary caretaker, Christopher would play video games with her and hide and seek, and there was really no conflict that would have caused her to run away. Now, there's a saying that kids run away for two basic reasons. They're either running from something or to something. Christopher was basically saying she wouldn't have run from them, so the police were wondering, was it possible that she ran to someone? Was she staying with a friend? Christopher said Madalina did have some friends. He only knew their first names, not their last names. And she did play that online horse game, which has a chat feature. So that's to say that Madalina had some friends who were just online friends. They were basically online avatars to her. Anyone could have been behind those profiles. So Christopher was asked about her communications with people within the game, and he said she chatted with them, and he would remind her not to put any personally identifiable information out there. But I don't suspect he monitored this chat very much because he didn't see Madalina for 3 weeks straight and thought that was fine. So I can't imagine he was watching her online communications. He said he was under the impression that she was just chatting with other little girls within the game. He definitely didn't think Madalina would have run away or been lured away by someone from the internet. Christopher was asked if he thought Diana knew where Madalina was, and he said part of him says yes, but he didn't know. He also brought up that he saw a show or something about kids getting kidnapped, but he didn't say it with heavy concern in his voice, so it doesn't sound like he thought that happened either. Christopher was actually remarkably calm as he answered these questions, and he was not frantic or worried the way I imagine a lot of parents would have been when they were learning that their child or stepchild was missing. He knew Madalina was missing, he didn't know where she went, and he didn't seem that concerned. Now, that might just be his personality, and maybe he really shouldn't be judged by this very reserved reaction, but it didn't give the cops a lot of confidence in what he was saying. The detectives went out to the family home that day to do a search, and they found some things in this house that were pretty odd. One was that there was plywood blocking off an area of the kitchen, and when he was asked about this, Christopher said he was separating it off to build an apartment within the house. When searching the bedrooms, the investigators realized that Christopher and Diana did not share a room. He had the main bedroom and his clothes were in the closet there. And then Diana had a smaller room with her clothes, and in her room there was an exposed carpet pad. Someone removing a rug or a piece of carpet in a home of a missing child is going to look suspicious, but this could be explained by something else the police noticed. The family had around 10 to 15 cats who were not all litter box trained. They seemed to do their business wherever they did it, and it's possible one of the cats had made a mess in that spot. But I would think if you got rid of the carpet because the mess was so bad you couldn't clean it, it would have possibly seeped through to the pad, and you would have disposed of both. When the police checked Madalina's room, things looked very typical for an 11-year-old. She had all her horse stuff around, and her bed was covered with a Disney-themed comforter. Nothing looked out of place, and like Diana had said, they didn't see her backpack anywhere. So that covers the main rooms in the house, but they did find something else worth noting in Diana's purse. Inside, wrapped in aluminum foil, they found about $7,500 in cash, and they found Diana and Madalina's passports. The money raised some eyebrows because in Diana's car, they also found a Western Union receipt from December 13th that showed Diana had sent her mother in Moldova $3,000. Additional receipts were found for more money that was wired, upwards of $4,000. Diana's daughter was missing, and she had thousands and thousands of dollars that she was moving around. The search of the house found no evidence of Madalina's whereabouts or what happened to her. So 2 days later, on December 17th, Christopher Palmer and Madalina Cojocari were arrested and charged with failure to report the disappearance of a child to law enforcement. This is commonly known as Kaylee's Law, named after Kaylee Anthony, and it requires people to report a child's missing within 24 hours. In North Carolina, this charge can either be a Class 1 felony or a Class 1 misdemeanor, depending on the circumstances. Generally, if a parent or another person providing supervision does not know the location of a child for 24 hours and has not contacted the police, it's a felony. But if it's just a person who reasonably suspects a child is missing and they don't contact the police, that's when it becomes a misdemeanor. So just some quick examples of people who would be like that would be Diana's mother, if she lived in the United States, if she lived in North Carolina within the jurisdiction, and Diana told her Madalina was missing, like she said she did, she could have been charged with the misdemeanor, again, only if she was in the United States. The school counselor's another example. If she had not called the police after that meeting with Diana, that would have fallen under the misdemeanor. But of course, the counselor did call the police immediately, which is what Christopher and Diana should have done. And since they were the parents and didn't do it, they were charged with felonies. Now, the priority here wasn't necessarily to charge and convict and throw the book at these parents for anything. The goal was to find Madalina. I think there was some hope here that the arrests would put pressure on those who knew where she was, and if she was alive, it would flush out her location. After all, the best defense to this charge is to prove you knew where your kid was the whole time. All Diana or Christopher would have had to do if Madalina was alive is say, oh, she's over there with this family member. And neither one of them did that. The investigation was really working with multiple theories of what happened, and they were following the various strands to see what the evidence supported. But it seems to me, as I look back on this with what is publicly available, two theories became the forerunners pretty early on. The first was that Diana gave Madalina to a relative to hide her, and the second was that Madalina had, tragically, been killed for some unknown reason. To understand why both of these are on the table, we do have to back up about a week after Madalina was last seen. On November 30th, 2022, a neighbor of Diana and Christopher called the cops to report that there was a fire burning between Diana and Christopher's home and the car wash that was behind their property. Diana was saying, oh no, it's fine, but this fire was getting bigger and bigger. The call was made a little before 5:30 in the evening, and when the police came out, they learned that Diana was burning furniture. The incident report that has been released has been heavily redacted, but it appears that it was a couch and a mattress being burned. Furniture from a house of a missing child being burned is just as suspicious as the missing carpet. Christopher would later say it was not unusual for Diana to burn things in the backyard, including furniture that the cats had soiled. Sometimes she'd even try to burn things that weren't flammable, like a metal coat rack. So to him, this wasn't that suspicious. I disagree with him, and I don't think burning furniture was the only suspicious thing Diana did. She also made repeated trips to the mountains of North Carolina, going as far west as Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, between November 22nd, the day after Madalina was seen getting off the bus, and December 15th, when she met the police at the school. The police do have some specific dates and times of these trips, thanks to automatic license plate readers, as well as a traffic stop in Madison County, North Carolina. But based on what the patrolman said and what they could see on traffic cameras, Madalina was never in the car, or at least not in a visible seat. So why was Diana going back and forth to mountain locations? On December 2nd, there was a text that Diana sent that indicated she was with Madalina at that moment, or at least in her presence, whatever that means. That was the same day Diana had, quote, extensive communications with a cousin of hers, Octavian, that one relative in the United States. And Octavian's phone record showed that he was in contact with people who were currently under investigation for drug trafficking. Apparently, Diana was talking to Octavian about getting Madalina out of the home and away from Christopher. The following day, December 3rd, Diana got an oil change, and the attendant said he remembered seeing toys in the car, but not Madalina. Then fast forward to the day after Madalina was reported missing, and there was surveillance footage of a child and a man in Linville, North Carolina. This is about 2 hours away from Madalina's home, and the man looked like Octavian, and the child fit the description of Madalina. This is the day after she was reported missing. What this sounds like, to me, with just these details, is that Diana gave Madalina to Octavian for him to hide her from Christopher, possibly while Diana proceeded with the divorce. Perhaps the trips to the mountains were to see her or to move her location. But if that's what happened, why, when Diana was arrested, she didn't just use that as her defense and produce Madalina? The exact details of what Octavian has or has not told the police have not been made public, aside from him saying that Diana and her mother did ask for his help in getting both Diana and Madalina away from Christopher. Whatever he knows or whatever he said has not led to Madalina's location, and he also has not been charged with anything. Obviously, the police know way more than has been made public, particularly about the situation, but I have to bring it up even though it's a big question mark because it's a pretty big part of the case.
علي الحماس مع منيو بيتزا هات ماي بوكس الجديد. 4 خيارات ماي بوكس تعدلها على كيفك وزيد عليها اختيارات ما لها حدود. اطلب ماي بوكس اليوم وخليها على ذوقك. بيتزا أو ملت كله بكيفك، وطلباتك الجانبية اختر 2 أو مشروب، خياراتك ما تنتهي. هي شروطك وأحكامك اللي ترضي ذوقك. منيو بيتزا هات ماي بوكس الجديد بشروطك وأحكامك. بيتزا هات اطلب اليوم.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.
Because no one disclosed Madalina's location, Christopher and Diana sat in pretrial lockup, and while they were there, they made some phone calls. As we know, jailhouse calls are recorded, and this was another hope that one of them would slip up on a call, and that information would lead to Madalina's whereabouts. But the only details of these calls that have been released to the public have been financial in nature. Like when Christopher talked to his brother and said that Diana had a lot of cash with her, and he didn't know where it came from. And then we have a call between Diana and her mother where they talked about taking out cash and discussed a theory that they would repeat later on, and that's that Christopher had sold Madalina for money. The only reason we know the contents of these calls is because the police used them to get access to the couple's bank records from October through December 19th, 2022. I mean, if they're both talking about money and they have a missing child, maybe the answer is in those bank records. Aside from Diana sending thousands of dollars to family members, it doesn't look like anything really suspicious was found. The next big piece of news to break in this case were additional charges against Diana. While in lockup, she was searched, as inmates periodically are, and they found a small, clear plastic baggie in her shirt pocket. When they tested the contents, it was fentanyl and cocaine. She claimed she found the baggie in the showers a few days before and just took it without really thinking anything of it. They did charge her with a drug offense that they later dropped due to insufficient evidence. However, if Diana was involved in drug use before being in lockup, that may bring to light some other avenues the police could pursue as far as where Madalina went. About a month after Diana had been charged with the drug offense, Madalina's 12th birthday passed without any clues as to where she was, but there was a big media push for her case thanks to a vigil that was held and well attended. We know that anything that gets the media's attention and gets this information out to the public is a win for a case, so that was a really helpful thing that people did by holding that vigil. On August 17th, 2023, after 8 months on pretrial detention, Christopher and Diana both appeared in court and officially pleaded not guilty. Christopher's attorney successfully argued to have his bond lowered from $200,000 to $25,000. He was able to pay it and he was released the next day on electronic monitoring. Diana also got her bond lowered, but not nearly as much. Hers was set at $100,000 and she couldn't pay it, so she stayed locked up. She was still incarcerated when Madalina's 13th birthday passed in April of 2024, with still no signs as to where she was. And then the following month, on May 20th, 2024, Christopher's trial was just about to start when Diana made a surprise guilty plea to the charge of not reporting Madalina's disappearance. This plea was not part of a plea deal, but it is very possible that Diana simply did some math, or her attorney did. Diana's time on pretrial detention at that point was 17 months. That was the maximum sentence she would have gotten had she been found guilty. So she could avoid the trial, avoid all of the information that would come out during it, and get released from jail almost immediately with one simple guilty plea, which is what she did. The only thing that would be an issue for her as far as continued punishment would be that she was now a convicted felon and she was not a U.S. citizen, so she was subject to deportation. I mean, alternatively, she could go on Dancing with the Stars like con artist and deportation avoider Anna Delvey did, but that's another conversation for another day. Diana, instead, was just released from jail on May 21st. Journalists were, of course, there to capture the moment, and they asked her if she knew where Madalina was, and according to some written reports, she answered, quote, "I hope so, I hope she's safe." I thought maybe it was a language thing with the media yelling questions at her because do you know where Madalina is as the question and the answer being, I hope so? It doesn't really sound right. But I went and I watched the actual video, and this was just a poorly summarized written report. What actually happened was that one reporter asked if Madalina was safe, and another one pretty much immediately asked if Diana knew where Madalina was. So Diana answered, I hope so, to the first question, is she safe? Not the second one, do you know where Madalina is? It makes complete sense when you watch it happen, and the Charlotte Observer video of this exchange will be linked in my sources. According to Christopher, the day Diana was released from jail, he found her sleeping on the porch swing at their house. He let her come inside and spend the night, but then his much more sensible brother stepped in and brought her instead to a hotel. However, there were neighbors who said they would see her napping on the porch and hanging out at the neighborhood pool even after this. Christopher's trial then finally began on May 24th, 2024. Something interesting about this case was the language they were required to use. No one knows where Madalina is or what happened to her, so they were not allowed to call her a victim. And this is something we do often in missing persons cases, where we refer to someone as a victim when we really don't know if they're a victim or not. And while I can do that here on a podcast without repercussion, in front of a jury in a courtroom, this type of language matters. They were only allowed to refer to Madalina by her name or refer to her as the child at issue. What the state had to prove at trial was that Christopher was in the role of a parent and or supervisor of Madalina, and he didn't report that she went missing. So the defense had to do the opposite. They had to paint the picture that Diana was in charge fully, and not just of Madalina, but most of their joint life. The defense also challenged the idea that Madalina was missing in the traditional sense by arguing that Diana, the mother, knew where she was. She was the one withholding that information, but the state countered that it didn't matter if she was. Whether Diana knew where Madalina was or not, Christopher knew he hadn't seen her in 3 weeks, and he did nothing. The only person who could really explain Christopher's side of this was Christopher himself, so he took the stand. He explained how he met Diana on that matchmaking website and about her and Madalina moving to the United States. He said that when they initially moved in together, Diana slept in Madalina's room on a trundle bed to help her acclimate to a new country. After that, she moved into the primary bedroom with Christopher, but he snored a lot and woke up early for work, so after about a year, she moved to a spare room. When describing their relationship, Christopher said that it was more spiritual and emotional than physical. And by that, he meant they never had sex. Not once. A kiss on the lips on a special occasion was about as far as it went. Christopher talked about Diana's spiritual beliefs, and he said that it was mostly just prayers and stuff back in 2017, but then it gradually escalated going into 2022. By that point, Diana would be up half the night praying and chanting, and sometimes she would make Christopher and Madalina join in. She would correct David if he wasn't sitting right or chanting properly. Diana also believed in this practice where she would swing a knife above their heads and their hands and such to cut the strings of demons. So if you kind of picture cutting a puppet's strings, then that's what she did. There was a knife found in her car on the front seat when they searched it, and maybe that was the knife she used for this purpose. Christopher said it wasn't just Diana's religious practices that were escalating in 2022, it was also her paranoia. He said in the spring, Diana told him that she needed to talk to him outside of the house and he needed to leave his phone inside. She said that she believed that Russian entities were after her, namely Michael Jackson and Vladimir Putin. Michael Jackson, as we know, was already dead at this point, and it's unclear his role here or what his ties to Russia are. But the issue was that Diana said she had land and titles in Russia that Putin wanted control of, and the only way to get them was to force Diana to marry him. To avoid being abducted by Vladimir Putin, Diana wanted Christopher's help in hiding her and Madalina somewhere. He said he didn't know exactly how to do that, so he wanted to call his family or maybe look stuff up online, but Diana insisted he had to figure out where they could hide without doing any of that. If he called someone or went online, that was leaving a trail, and it would defeat the purpose of disappearing, obviously. They eventually came up with the idea that Diana and Madalina could go stay with some of David's family who didn't share the same last name, so there wouldn't be an obvious connection. So Christopher, since he wasn't allowed to do this over the phone, drove 13 hours to Michigan. and made these arrangements for Madalina and Diana to stay with his brother's wife's sister and her mother. Diana and Madalina went up there in what sounds like the summer of 2022, but Diana returned to North Carolina with Madalina, saying it did not work out. She went out to brunch with one of the family members, and that family member put her phone on the table. Diana said that she was recording her, and the whole situation was compromised. Before Diana had gone to Michigan, Christopher gave her $15,000 in cash so she wouldn't be entirely dependent on other people up there. And when she came back to North Carolina, she gave it back to him. Christopher did not count it, though, and he would later realize that she didn't give him all of it. So that would explain some of the money she had. Diana's paranoia about people being after her was also why they fought over Diana's name being on the paperwork for the silver investment. Christopher admitted on the stand that he sold it at a loss at her insistence, which was part of the defense trying to show the jury that Diana controlled things in the house. That also included a side business he had, doing laser engravings, a business he felt really passionate and really loved doing, but Diana demanded that he sell his equipment and stop it. He testified that her control extended to Madalina. Once Madalina started at the middle school, Diana started having those complaints. I already mentioned the reading material one, but there was another one. She saw something that referred to stopping human and sex trafficking, and for some reason, she thought it was targeted at Madalina, like a threat. She would rant about how the schools were indoctrinating children, and that is when homeschooling would come up. But Christopher made no moves towards starting to homeschool Madalina because that wasn't his job. That was entirely under Diana's purview, as Diana was the parent in the home. As far as what happened when Madalina went missing, Christopher said that he and Diana had actually gotten into a pretty big argument on Sunday, November 20th, 2022. Diana said he left a cup next to the coffee maker instead of, I guess, putting it away. He told her he wasn't the one who left it there, and she got mad, so she threw the mug and smashed it on the floor, and then she grabbed some more dishes and cups and threw them around the kitchen. The next day, which was the last day Madalina was in school, Diana demanded that Christopher replace the mug that she had broken. So he ended up going to Walmart after work, and it took him a while to look around and find a mug that was similar enough, or at least nearly identical, to the broken one. So this meant he got home later than usual, and it sounds like he did not see Madalina that night. He went to work the next day without seeing Madalina, and then he didn't see her when he got home. But he and Diana got into that fight over the silver investment. Christopher said that his initial plans for the long Thanksgiving weekend was to work on house projects, but Diana insisted that he go get the things they left in Michigan. And she insisted on this the morning he left. He had about 45 minutes to prep, so he packed up what he could and left on the morning of the 23rd for Michigan, while he thought Madalina was upstairs sleeping. When he came back from Michigan, he unloaded the bins of clothes into the house, and as he was doing that, Diana told him that he had to go to the store to buy cat food, which he did. Again, this is showing how Diana controlled things. The mug wasn't where she wanted it to be, so she smashed it and then demanded he replace it. Which he did. And then she ordered him to go to Michigan, and he left within the hour. And then, even though he just drove 13 hours to get home, he got back in the car and went to go get cat food, stopping at 2 different stores to get the specific brand Diana told him to get. When Christopher finally got home from not just Michigan, but running these errands, he looked around properly and noticed that some furniture had been rearranged. There was a large dresser that was pushed in front of the front door, and the trundle from under Madalina's bed was on the back porch. There was mattress fabric that appeared to have been burned, and this is when he noticed that there was carpet missing from Diana's room. He said he did not know what was going on, but it doesn't sound like he asked either. Christopher then went to work as usual on Monday and Tuesday. His routine was to work from the office Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday he worked from home, which was a big help since his office was actually a 90-minute commute each way. But they ended up having internet issues at the house that week, so he had to go to the office all 5 days. Because of how long the commute was, he would leave before Madalina woke up, and then he wouldn't get home until around 7:30 or 7:45. They rarely ate dinner together as a family, or really do much as a family day to day, so while he noticed Madalina's light was on in her room, he assumed she was playing on her computer or reading, and it didn't strike him as odd at first that he didn't see her. One night they ordered pizza and he made Madalina a plate so he could bring it up to her room, and Diana took it from him, saying that she would be the one to bring it upstairs. Again, they didn't normally eat as a family, and Madalina often ate in her room, so he didn't think anything of it. Christopher then realized that the issue with the internet was that the wires had been severed. Whether they were cut or worn, he didn't seem to know, but he called AT&T to have someone come out and fix it. According to AT&T, they tried to send a tech out, but no one answered the door when they got there for the scheduled appointment. Christopher rescheduled, and the same thing happened. No one was there. So that would kind of explain the Thanksgiving holiday and that first week Madalina was missing. Christopher was out of town at first, and then he was at work, commuting 3 hours a day. But then what about when the weekend hit and he was home all day and didn't see Madalina? Well, according to Christopher, that can be explained by the notes left from Diana saying that she and Madalina had gone on a hiking trip. And as for the November 30th burning of the furniture, he said that was just something Diana did. She burned things. He did realize at some point that Diana had burned photos of Madalina, but I don't think this detail helps his case much. He didn't see Madalina, and Diana was burning her photos. I think that's the point where most people would press and find out what was really going on, and if they couldn't, they would have called the police. I am really trying to see this from his point of view. If he thinks that Diana is paranoid and feels that she and Madalina are at risk, maybe burning the photos was something she was doing to protect Madalina. But on the other hand, if your wife is that paranoid, why are you just going with the flow and reinforcing her delusions instead of getting her help? I think the defense argument would be that Christopher was completely under Diana's thumb, but at some point, I feel he has to take accountability for being the adult in that situation who could have helped Madalina and could have protected her. Christopher's testimony is where we get the information that he thought Diana was preparing to leave him, and this started on Tuesday, December 6th, which was a week after the furniture burning, when Christopher found a note that said, "Gone for 2 days," and he assumed Diana had just taken Madalina out of town. We know this note happened, and when it happened, because Christopher took a picture of it. According to him, he was in the habit of snapping photos of things because he was dealing with some memory issues, and photos helped him keep track. Another thing he took a photo of were the blue bins that he had brought back from Michigan with mostly Madalina's clothing. He thought the number of totes had grown, so he took a photo so he would remember how many there were. Inside some of them, instead of just being the clothing, were also household items. And this is why he suspected that Diana was preparing to leave him, and using this photo, he could keep track to see if any of the bins were then moved out of the house. On December 8th, the day he expected Diana to come home, she didn't show, and that's when he started to think that she had taken Madalina and left. But then, on December 11th, Diana came back. This is day 5 of her 2-day trip, and she didn't have Madalina with her. On the 12th, Christopher said he demanded to see Madalina and was told it wasn't his business where she was. Diana told him he needed to focus on making his own family with someone else, which was confirmation that the marriage was ending, and at this point, Diana was in full control of Madalina and what happened to her. But that is only according to Christopher. there are some other indicators that he was in the loop when it came to Madalina's care. For one, Christopher had been getting the emails about Madalina not being in class. They weren't just going to Diana, and a search of his phone showed that he had opened them. So he was aware that he didn't see Madalina in these 3 weeks, and that the school hadn't seen her either. And then there was a text from December 13th with Christopher telling Diana to contact the school to let them know that they would be homeschooling Madalina. That is an odd text for someone who had no control over Madalina's care to send. That text by itself has been interpreted in different ways by the general public. Christopher could have been telling Diana to withdraw Madalina from school because he knew she was missing and he was helping cover it up. But it could also be that they had been talking about homeschooling Madalina. She wasn't going to school, and so it was time to officially withdraw her from the middle school and get those truancy people off their backs. I feel like either of those motivations makes sense in this context, but what doesn't make sense was Christopher's assertion that he thought Diana may be hiding Madalina from him. If she was hiding Madalina from him, why is he suggesting she homeschool? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it was basically his defense. He believed Madalina was alive, being hidden by her mother who controlled everything, and that is why he didn't report her missing. Christopher did show emotion at points during his testimony, like when he said how romanceless his marriage was, and also while looking at pictures of Madalina. But unfortunately, there was nothing in Christopher's testimony that really gives us any clue as to where she went. He just had excuses for why he didn't report her missing. To support the idea that Diana was the controlling one in the relationship, Christopher did have a friend testify about an odd, unreasonable request she had, and how Christopher just went along with it. The incident happened while they were taking a trip to an island off the North Carolina coast, and some people started taking pictures of a rainbow. Very normal thing to do. But Diana started to tell them to stop doing it because it wasn't permitted. What they were actually observing when they saw the rainbow was an angel getting crowned, and it was inappropriate, sacrilegious even, to photograph it. Diana got so worked up that the friend had to tell her to just stop. He said there was no way Christopher would have done anything or stood up to Diana at all. But the state argued that was no excuse. In fact, it's all the more reason Christopher should have called the police. Diana was delusional, unstable, and she was refusing to say where her daughter was. That's enough reason for any reasonable person to have called the police. And the jury agreed. They deliberated for minutes before finding 61-year-old Christopher Palmenter guilty on May 31st, 2024, and they sent the message he should have reported Madalina missing. Due to the 7 months he already spent locked up, Christopher ended up getting 30 months of supervised probation. Just over a week later, Christopher filed for divorce from Diana, and then 2 weeks after that, the police officially named Madalina Cojocari a suspect in Madalina's disappearance. They did not name Christopher a suspect. And this is why I'm glad I looked more into this case, because going into the research, I was equally suspicious of both of them. I already knew Madalina was last seen getting off a school bus, and then not long after that, her stepfather drove from North Carolina to Michigan. That seems suspicious. But after I watched his body cam interview, what I could understand of it, and watched his testimony at trial, I have to say I more or less believe him. I do believe Diana did things to keep Christopher out of the house, like sending him out for the mug and off to Michigan and the cat food. And I think she possibly cut the internet cable so he had to go into work, and she then avoided the repairman. I think it's possible that Christopher is a passive and incurious man who takes marching orders just to keep the peace. That is absolutely no excuse for neglecting Madalina's well-being. In those 3 weeks she was missing, no excuse. But I don't think it points towards his guilt or his knowledge of what happened to her. Maybe one day I'll be proven the fool for believing him, and Diana's family certainly would call me one, Diana and her mother have openly accused Christopher of abuse, claiming he kept Diana and Madalina like prisoners, and that he was the controlling one who withheld their documents. And that absolutely happens in some cases of overseas matchmaking. It has been so bad at points that the U.S. has passed legislation trying to regulate this industry to some degree. But there's no evidence that's what happened here. Diana had access to money. She had her own car. She left notes letting Christopher know she went somewhere for days at a time. We know she had her own and Madalina's passports in her purse. I saw a claim online that Christopher was keeping them in the basement, but according to Zillow, the houses in their neighborhood are built on slabs. They don't even have basements. But that is Diana's defense, that Christopher was in control and he sold Madalina to traffickers for $5 million. Of course, the police have looked into their financials, and if there was some unexplained influx of money, they would have seen it. What they actually learned looking into the financial records was that Diana was taking money from Christopher that he was unaware of. So he was losing money after Madalina disappeared, not gaining it. Maybe Diana's mother, who is the main source of this theory, believes what Diana is telling her, but it's clear the police don't, as they have named Diana, and Diana alone, as a suspect. On July 9th, 2024, Diana posted a picture on Facebook of her and her mother on a plane, and she wrote that she was on her way from JFK to Frankfurt and then Bucharest. Obviously, this led to speculation that she was back in Moldova, which put her outside of the reach of U.S. authorities, as we do not have an extradition agreement with Moldova. In fact, it's against the Moldovan constitution to extradite their own citizens to other countries. On August 29th, 2024, it was announced that there was a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Madalina's case. And then days later, U.S. Immigration confirmed that Madalina Cojocari had left the United States. For someone who supposedly believes her ex-husband sold her daughter into trafficking, seems strange to me that she left the country rather than staying to look for her. Years ago, I read something that Sarah Turney had said about how podcasters handle unsolved cases like this. She said it was hard, as the family member of a missing person, to hear a podcast say at the end of an episode that it's unlikely someone is still alive, or that it's unlikely they'll be found or their case be solved. What it says to the family is that they shouldn't have hope. After hearing that, I have stopped speculating beyond what the police have said they believe happened based on the evidence, or what the family believes happened. My analysis of the case while sitting at my house reading newspaper archives is of no benefit. But that doesn't mean I don't cover cases where the likelihood is that the person has been murdered. I cover them, I present the evidence, and I just withhold my opinion. But in this case, there are indications Madalina was alive past when she was last seen on the bus. Not confirmed, but they've also not ruled out the footage of Octavian with a girl who looks like Madalina. It doesn't necessarily make sense to us why Diana won't reveal where she is, but if she's as paranoid and delusional as Christopher said, it's possible that she would rather go to jail for 17 months than give up the location of her daughter. It's also possible that Diana doesn't know where she is. She knew at one point, she made a plan, but then she lost control of the situation. There is a strong chance that Madalina Cojocari is out there alive. At the time she went missing, she was 11 years old, and she would be 13 today. She was last seen getting off the bus wearing a jacket, a white t-shirt, jeans, and pink, purple, and white Adidas shoes. Her school backpack did go missing with her, and it appears to be a black backpack. She had long brown hair and has brown eyes. If you think you see Madalina, snap a picture and call 911. Those pictures are really helpful when sorting through tips, particularly if she is gone by the time the police get there. But if you just have general information about this case, you can call the Cornelius Police Department at 704-892-1363 Or you can call NCMEC at 1-800-THE-LOST. I will have this information in my show notes, as well as a link to my website where I will post a full timeline, pictures, and the footage from the bus. That is basementfortproductions.com, and it is all down there in the episode description.